She stepped off the curb, the dusk already stretching shadows long across the pavement. Emily paused under a flickering lamppost, clutching her map and phone, uncertain which direction to take. Every passing car felt like a judgment, every footstep behind her a threat. At that moment, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She flagged down a man walking by and asked, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Elmwood Avenue?" He looked at her steadily, his face calm. Then he spoke, softly, authoritatively, and suddenly, tears welled in her eyes. Because what he said exposed something she had been running from her entire life. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. You may be wondering, why did Emily in that moment call out to a stranger at all? What was going through her mind when she turned and asked, "Can you help me find Elmwood Avenue?" Was she simply lost? Or was there some deeper fear driving her steps? And who was the man she approached walking quietly along a dim sidewalk, face calm yet inscrutable? What he said next shattered the fragile calm she carried inside her and left her helpless with tears in broad daylight. Was it chance that led her to him? Or had fate directed her steps towards something she could never have prepared for? In that instant between question and answer, a door slid open into a past she had kept hidden, and it demanded to be heard. What secret did his words unlock? Why did a simple request so profoundly wound her? What truth lay beneath his response? And what would she do next now that it flooded her world with uncertainty? Emily grew up in a small Midwestern town where the streets were quiet, the neighbors waved to one another, and the horizon was filled with long stretches of cornfields. Her childhood was marked by ordinary routines: church on Sundays, soccer practice on weeknights, and family dinners around a scratched wooden table. She was known for her bright smile, her willingness to help classmates who struggled with their homework, and her habit of carrying a small notebook where she scribbled down dreams of the future. To those who knew her best, Emily was a girl full of hope, determined to see life beyond the town limits. Yet beneath her eagerness to grow, there were unspoken questions, pieces of her family's past that never seemed to be fully explained. Friends described her as thoughtful, sometimes quiet in a way that suggested she was waiting for an answer she couldn't quite put into words. The man she approached that evening had a story of his own. To most in the city, he was just another figure blending into the rhythm of life. Someone you might pass in a grocery aisle or see sitting alone at a diner counter. His name was Thomas, and for years he carried himself with the calm steadiness of someone who had experienced both triumph and loss. He was once respected in his profession, known for his meticulous work and reliability. But time had carved lines into his face, and certain choices had left him more isolated than he admitted. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, the sort of man who never caused trouble, but never allowed anyone too close either. There were whispers about things he had endured years before, events that left him quieter than most, and perhaps more aware of the pain others carried. To some, he was a mystery, to others, simply forgotten. Emily's life and Thomas's existence seemed to run on parallel tracks never meant to meet. Yet on that evening, chance, or something that felt stronger, brought them to the same street corner. Emily's innocence, her search for a simple direction, collided with Thomas's quiet history in a way that neither could have prepared for. As Emily's friends later recalled, she was at an age where the future seemed limitless, but also fragile, easily disrupted by words that cut too close to the heart. And Thomas, despite his quiet demeanor, carried with him knowledge and memories that had the power to alter someone else's path forever. Their meeting was not planned, yet the weight it carried would ripple far beyond that brief exchange. That evening, Emily had been walking longer than she expected. She had missed a turn, and what began as a simple stroll turned into an unsettling stretch of unfamiliar streets. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving the neighborhood painted in dim tones, and each passing car felt distant and disinterested. Emily clutched her bag a little tighter, her phone battery hovering low, its dim light no longer enough to guide her. She could feel the anxiety rising, a quiet pulse in her chest. She looked around and saw only a few strangers, but one figure stood out. Thomas, moving at an unhurried pace, hands in his pockets, his posture calm. For reasons she couldn't explain, she chose him. stepped forward, and with a voice wavering between politeness and desperation asked, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Elmwood Avenue?" In that moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. What followed depends on who you ask. Some of those who later heard Emily recount the moment described Thomas's expression as reassuring, even kind, as though he wanted to put her at ease. They said he stood still for a moment, studied her carefully, then nodded, ready to help. Others insisted there was something unsettling in his composure, a calmness too controlled, almost as if he had been waiting for her all along. They believed Emily's hesitation was visible, that her eyes darted as though she sensed a weight behind his stillness. To those who pieced together the fragments later, Thomas's tone was steady, but the meaning of his words carried an edge that no one could quite agree upon. Was he trying to guide a lost girl home, or had his answer struck at something buried in her life, something she had not expected to confront in that fleeting encounter? Emily's own response told its own story. At first, she listened carefully, her brow furrowed as though she was processing every word. But then, a shift took place. Her lips trembled, her eyes filled, and before she could steady herself, tears broke free. She turned slightly away as though to hide the sudden wave of emotion, but Thomas remained still, his gaze unwavering. Those who saw her later remembered the shock on her face, the way she tried to regain her composure but couldn't. Whatever he had said, it pierced through the simple question she had asked, reaching something raw within her. It was no longer about directions to Elmwood Avenue. It was about a truth delivered without warning, a revelation that cut deeper than any map could explain. And then, his answer brought her to tears. In the days that followed, whispers of what happened to Emily began to spread quietly at first, then louder as more people repeated the story. Neighbors wondered aloud why she had been so shaken by such a simple exchange. Parents in her community asked the same question. What could a man like Thomas possibly have said to bring a young girl to tears in the middle of the street? To some, it was a simple misunderstanding, a moment when Emily's emotions overwhelmed her. But to others, it was proof that something more had been said, words that touched a wound too deep to ignore. Soon, her classmates spoke of it at school. Reporters began to ask questions, and the mystery of that night took on a life larger than the moment itself. Why did Emily cry? And what secret was Thomas holding back? No one could agree, but no one could stop asking. Speculation multiplied quickly. In one version of the story, Thomas had been trying to protect Emily. He had seen her walking alone, recognized the danger of the darkened streets, and warned her about something she did not want to believe. This theory painted him as a guardian of sorts, a stranger with good intentions who startled her only with his blunt honesty. But another version cast a very different shadow. Some claimed his words carried a threat, that he revealed knowledge of her or her family that no ordinary stranger should have known. In this retelling, he was not protecting but confronting, not guiding but exposing. The more people speculated, the further the truth slipped from reach. Each perspective divided the community, leaving friends and neighbors caught between the image of Thomas as a kind-hearted man and the suspicion that he was hiding something far more troubling. It did not take long before the authorities became involved. The police opened an inquiry, not because a crime had been committed, but because the uncertainty had grown too heavy to ignore. Officers interviewed Emily carefully, their questions circling around the same point. What exactly did Thomas say to you? Her responses were hesitant, at times unclear, as though she herself struggled to put the experience into words. They also spoke to Thomas, who answered their questions with a calm steadiness that revealed little. Records were checked, his past reviewed, and neighbors questioned. Yet the more they searched, the less clarity they found. The investigation itself seemed to create more mystery than resolution, with each detail examined under a magnifying glass, only to reveal another layer of confusion. It was as if both Emily and Thomas carried truths they could not or would not fully share, leaving the authorities with fragments of a puzzle they could not piece together. Rumors spread further than the facts. Some whispered that Emily had narrowly escaped an abduction, that Thomas's calm voice had been a disguise for something more dangerous. Others pointed to stories from years before, unproven but haunting, suggesting Thomas had once been linked to a tragedy never solved. Newspapers and online outlets seized on these whispers, shaping them into headlines that traveled beyond the town. Soon, Thomas was cast in the public eye not as a man with an ambiguous past, but as a figure of suspicion, his face tied to headlines that questioned his innocence. Each article seemed to move further from the truth, exaggerating what little was known and feeding a narrative no one could quite prove. The frenzy only deepened Emily's silence, and her tears became a symbol no one could interpret with certainty. The more voices added to the story, the further the truth retreated. Families debated it around dinner tables. Journalists searched for records that did not exist, and online forums dissected every rumor as if it were evidence. In the center of it all stood Emily and Thomas, one carrying emotions she could not explain, the other carrying a calm that only deepened suspicion. Was Thomas protecting her from a danger only he understood? When the investigation reached its midpoint, the question everyone demanded an answer to was finally confronted head-on. What exactly had Thomas said to Emily? For weeks, she had hesitated to share, her words halting, her tears overwhelming any attempt to explain. But eventually, pressed by those closest to her, she whispered the truth. Thomas had not given her directions at all. Instead, his answer reached into her family's history, into a wound she never fully understood. He looked her in the eyes and quietly told her something about her father. Details that no stranger should have known. Details that broke open years of silence. Emily's father had passed away when she was very young, and much of his story had been shielded from her, but Thomas's words revealed a side of him that she was never meant to hear in that way, and the revelation struck her with a force she could not contain. According to Emily, Thomas had said that he once knew her father, not as a distant acquaintance but as someone tied to a secret long buried. He claimed he had worked alongside him years earlier, in circumstances the family never spoke of, involving choices that carried weight and consequence. What startled Emily was not only the revelation itself, but the certainty with which Thomas spoke, the conviction in his voice as he connected her life to a past she could not verify. If his words were true, they explained questions she had carried for years, gaps in her family's history, and the sense that there was always something unspoken around the dinner table. If his words were false, they were cruel, calculated to wound her at her most vulnerable moment. Either way, his calm delivery shattered the fragile understanding of her father she had grown up believing. The revelation forced the community into even sharper division. Some believed Thomas immediately, arguing that his calmness was not that of guilt, but of a man unburdening himself of a truth he had carried too long. They saw his words as an act of honesty, even if they cut Emily deeply. Others believed he was manipulating her, that his sudden connection to her father was a fabrication meant to confuse, frighten, or even gain control. To them, Thomas's revelation was not a confession of knowledge, but an intrusion into a family's grief. In court hearings and community meetings, testimonies conflicted. Family members defended the memory of Emily's father, while others hinted that perhaps Thomas's story explained things that had never made sense. Emily herself remained caught in the storm, her tears repeating the same truth. Whatever Thomas had said, it left her world altered forever. The emotional climax came when Emily's account was read aloud during a formal inquiry. Sitting before officials, her voice breaking, she repeated the words Thomas had said to her. The room fell silent, family members shifting uncomfortably as decades-old wounds were exposed. Some wept quietly, others turned away, unwilling to confront the possibility that the past held secrets that had been deliberately hidden. Thomas, sitting across the room, remained steady, offering no denial, no elaboration, only the same calm presence he had shown that night. It was not a confession in the traditional sense, nor a denial that cleared him. It was a statement that lingered like smoke in the air, impossible to grasp fully, but impossible to dismiss. Emily's tears were no longer a mystery. They were the reaction of a young girl who had asked a simple question, and received an answer that forever altered her understanding of who she was and where she came from. For many, Emily's testimony seemed to bring the matter to its natural end. The story had been told, the words spoken, the tears explained. But then, just when it appeared settled, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. Records were uncovered that revealed Thomas had once been questioned in connection with an unsolved incident decades earlier, an incident involving Emily's father. Though no charges had ever been filed, the record showed that Thomas had been one of the last people to see him alive on the day an accident occurred that left unanswered questions for years. The discovery reignited suspicion, leading some to believe that his calm words to Emily had not been about kindness or closure, but about unmasking a truth he had carried all along. Others insisted it was proof that Thomas was seeking redemption, confessing in his own way, without ever admitting guilt outright. Emily herself then delivered another revelation, one that shifted the balance again. In a moment of courage, she admitted that her father's past had always been wrapped in secrecy, that she had once overheard fragments of conversations suggesting there was more to his story than the family let on. Her tears, she explained, were not just from shock at Thomas's words, but from recognition. The unsettling recognition that what he said echoed things she had suspected, but never dared to voice. This admission turned the case inside out once again, for if Emily herself sensed truth in his words, then perhaps Thomas's revelation was not an invention. But if he had known her father, why had he waited until that night, until that simple request for directions to finally speak? Was it coincidence, or had he been waiting for an opportunity that fate finally placed in front of him? The community found itself unable to settle on a single conclusion. Some saw Thomas as a man haunted by secrets, whose silence had weighed on him until he could no longer bear it, and Emily became the unintentional recipient of his confession. Others saw him as someone who exploited a vulnerable girl's moment of need to press upon her a burden that was never his to share. In the absence of clear evidence, arguments raged on, dividing neighbors, friends, and even family members. What had begun as a simple moment, a girl asking for directions, had spiraled into a debate about truth, memory, and the nature of trust itself. Was Thomas a monster who revealed too much at the worst possible moment? A savior offering answers long denied? Or merely a man carrying unbearable secrets that spilled out when the right question was asked? In the end, no verdict could fully resolve the story. No courtroom ruling could determine the weight of words spoken quietly on a lonely street. For Emily, the night remained a turning point, a collision between innocence and truth that changed how she saw her family, herself, and the strangers she might meet in the world. For Thomas, his words remained both a revelation and a burden, something that would forever define him in the eyes of those who learned of them. And for the community, the story left behind a haunting reflection. How much of what we believe about others rests on silence, and how fragile that silence becomes when broken by a single sentence. In the end, perhaps the only certainty was that trust, once questioned, never returns unchanged. What would you have done if you were in Emily's place? Imagine standing on a quiet street asking a stranger for something as simple as directions, and receiving an answer that tears open a hidden chapter of your family's history. Would you have walked away, dismissing Thomas as a man speaking nonsense, or would you have let his words take root, forcing you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about your past? For Emily, the moment could not be undone. She carried his words with her like a weight she never asked for, a truth she could neither confirm nor deny, but that left her forever changed. And for Thomas, the question remains: did he free himself of a burden by speaking, or did he pass that burden to a girl too young to bear it? Justice in this story was never clear. What do you believe? Was justice served, or was something still left unsaid? We want to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments below. Do you see Thomas as a man with hidden guilt, a man with painful honesty, or simply a man who crossed paths with Emily at the wrong time? Was Emily's reaction proof of recognition, or only the shock of hearing something her heart wasn't ready to accept? Your voice matters because stories like these are not just about the people at the center, but about the way we interpret silence, secrets, and the fragility of trust. And if this story left you questioning, then consider this. The truth is not always found in courtrooms or headlines, but in the spaces between words, in the tears shed when hidden truths come to light. Tell us, what would you have done if those words were spoken to you? And if you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear about the stranger whose kindness uncovered a crime no one believed existed. That case will challenge your assumptions even more, revealing how a single act of compassion can unravel an entire hidden world. So make sure you don't miss it. Subscribe now for more stories that reveal the truth hiding in plain sight, stories that ask difficult questions, stir emotions, and remind us that sometimes the smallest moments carry the heaviest consequences. Because the line between ordinary and extraordinary is thinner than we think, and the truth often waits just beyond the words we are not prepared to hear.